I'm Rob. If I haven't met all of you already, I probably have. Rob Cook.
Thanks, Rob.
You're welcome. And I'm there. The first thing everybody asks is, I hear this is your last show, and I'm going to be coming back. I'll be here for hopefully at least 10 years at the Rebeats booth, doing Rebeats publications and consulting. The full production is going to be done by the Jugan brothers, and we've already started that transition. They're doing the consignments this year and supplying staff to help us with registration and so on. And I'm real proud of Brian and Johnny and their dad. And I think two of the wives are actually running the consignments. But they're a good family, a good crew, and the main goal is continuity. We didn't want to have any ripples in the continuity. They wanted the show to be run the way it has been run, and I shouldn't see too many major changes. One of the things that I'm looking forward to is being able to spend more time on some publications. I'm in the middle of a book on cymbals. It'll be called the Rebeats Cymbal Book. And there'll be an outline online soon, but there are several thrusts, and one is to straighten out the whole Zildjian narrative and the sequence of events and so on, and that gets into quite a rabbit hole. But my goal today is to bring you Michael Vosbein, and in addition to being a player and there's a bit of a narrative of his biography on his page in the program also. But today we're going to talk about his involvement in the cymbal industry. And we probably won't be talking about specific models and production methods and tone and so on, unless somebody has a specific question when we're done with the thrust of it. My real goal is to hear from Michael, his career path, because you've all noticed the number of cymbal makers, the independent cymbal smiths and everything, and that's the kind of thing I'm going into in depth in the cymbal book, explaining the sequence. The traditional narrative is Avitus Zildjian in 1623 somehow discovered the magic formula, and it was passed on father to son through the centuries and so on. And we're going to kind of straighten that out with all respect to Zildjian, but a lot of the history that's known kind of in the vernacular has been marketing of the last, few decades. There's a lot to be said about the Gretsch involvement with Zildjian and the litigation between Gretsch and Zildjian, which is almost like Slinger and Ludwig litigation. It's gone on for decades. Almost as soon as Zildjian started in this country, they were at loggerheads with Gretsch because Gretsch actually owned the Zildjian name, had a trademark on it in this country, and Zildjian in Boston was only able to use the Zildjian name as Avitus Zildjian Company, made in USA. But that's another story. I'm going to turn it over to Michael and let him talk about his career in the cymbal industry. Michael.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for coming, everyone. First, I'd like to say, when I had a cymbal company, I came to one of your shows for the first time, and I said, I'm in every year. This is just great. Thank you. And here it goes. It continues. But we all owe a great deal of thanks and gratitude to Mr. Rob Cook.
Thanks, Rob. My pleasure. Thank you.
See you later.
So you were here with Bosphorus the first time you came, right? Mm-hmm. And you weren't a principal in the company, but you were like the American representative, and
it's a convoluted story.
Okay.
The whole cymbal industry is what they call a Byzantine story, meaning very complicated and complex with lots of turns and twists and all of that stuff. My involvement with Bosphorus began. I was a professional musician and lived in LA a long time. I ended up in Atlanta, and people were saying, hey, these Bosphorus cymbals, you got to check them out, because I'm from the old school, thin, musical sounding, what the old Ks used to be when they were made in Istanbul. As Rob knows, it's a different company than the A Zildjian, though now they own the K brand. No slight on any of these companies, just for the historical accuracy. So I went and heard them at a trade show, and they said, well, these guys are in Atlanta. I said, well, I live in Atlanta. And I had a gig at the the Ritz I was the house drummer at a Ritz-Carlton there, which we did all kinds of things, orchestral, big band, everything. And I went to them, I said, I love your cymbals. Can I get involved? And they said, yeah, we'll make you a friend of the factory. So I got involved that way. And then Jeff Hamilton, who was my mentor in Los Angeles, a dear friend, had just come on, or was in the process of coming on. I think he'd just come on and we were going to do signature cymbals with him. I don't think anybody had done that before. His models that he created, and we could go into depth about that if you want to. But the guys who made the cymbals in Istanbul didn't speak English, but they didn't play drums either. So nobody ever put a stick to a cymbal. It was all tactile and ears and how it felt, and that's a mastery thing that's another whole story. But Jeff wanted somebody with ears who could do quality control in the United States to see what came in. So I was tasked with that. That made my involvement a little deeper in Bosphorus. Then I had the issue of, well, if I throw too many out, they're going to hate me. And if I don't throw enough out, Jeff's going to get all over me. So I think I walked that line pretty carefully, and sometimes he would come and find one or two he didn't like, but generally that's what I did. And then it turned out that the guy who was running it in Atlanta was kind of going belly up, and he was looking for some help to get out. Now here's where more of the Byzantine story starts. He owned the trademark Bosphorus Cymbals. He was a Turkish native, and he was in the United States, and he knew these guys who asked him to set up a cymbal business in the U.S. So he did. He's not a drummer, he's not a player, but he owned the trademark. Dicey already, right? So I set up a company with Jeff and a partner of mine, Bill Norman, and later we added Stanton Moore as the principals, and we licensed the trademark in perpetuity. So we were, I don't know how you explain that. Did we own the brand? Kind of, but it was their birthright and they made them. So I went there by myself, and turned out there was very bad blood between them and the guy who had it in the U.S. that I got it from. Eventually I solved that. Whatever you might have read online,
Between the Turkish factory and their distributor.
Yes, the U.S. distributor and the Turkish factory. The Turks, who really owned the brand and started, and they had mentored at some of these other companies, were very upset that they didn't own their trademark in the U.S. Now, the guy, Tosh, who owned it in the U.S., said, well, I saved their asses. I registered the trademark. They wouldn't have known to do that. These were people who didn't speak English. According to Tosh, they didn't speak Turkish very well. So they were not educated businessmen, and they had made some big mistakes. So I took it upon myself to eventually get their trademark back to them. So it was complicated. They didn't want to sell it to me. The guy didn't want to. I ended up fronting the money to pay the guy who had the stuff. He got cymbal credits. They got their trademark back. And then I decided, well, we had a company without a trademark. It's not what you could do with that. And in the end, if you're building a company, it doesn't really pay off till you sell the brand, and you can't really sell a brand you don't own. So we made the decision then to start our own company, and we called it Crescent Cymbals, and we rebranded that way. We knew some people who could make them, who were very close to the ones that we were making already. And we went there, Jeff and I did, and redesigned a whole thing, and we kept all the artists on board, kept 90% of the dealers on board, and we just kind of made that transition.
Was that Impression?
That was Impression Cymbals.
And were they doing business in Turkey and or the United States as Impression?
They were, and then they decided they would just fold it all into Crescent.
Okay.
And that didn't last very long. The problem with getting cymbals from Istanbul or any other place like that is anything could happen. They didn't keep inventory. If you wanted cymbals, you'd have to order them. And it might take a month to make them. Then you'd have to ship them. And you can ship them by air. My friend said, you don't ship cymbals, you ship lobsters by air. Not cymbals, because they weigh so much. But we did them by air, we did them by sea. It didn't really matter because it was such a small, less than a container load. It would take forever either way. And then you would end up with, it wasn't what you ordered, it took forever. When you got it, there were all kinds of problems. Or you're set to go to a PASIC event or a NAMB event, and your stuff's in a warehouse that's flooded from a hurricane. Or, anybody who imports has these issues. But when you're a little tiny company, you have one product from one supplier, you can have your back up against the wall pretty easily. So when we switched to, one of the things I had in mind when we started our own brand was to sell it, and I thought Sabian would be the people to buy it because they had the history of continuing to make cymbals by hand, whereas the American counterpart, Avidus Zildjian, chose to make them with more modern machinery. Fine. I'm not saying a handmade cymbal is better than a machine-made cymbal, I'm saying it has a different tonal palette. And so I got involved with Sabian to help make them for us, and then they eventually bought the whole brand. And then they eventually killed most of it except for the Jeff Hamilton models. But once you sell a company, you're out. You know, we had a nice deal. We signed a thing with the guys in Turkey where, you know, from the beginning of time until the end of the world, all problems are settled and we don't speak disparagingly of one another. So that's where we ended up. And I ended up selling it to Andy, and then right after that, the pandemic hit, and the industry, I don't know where it is now. My information is like 10 years old, maybe, on the state of the industry. But we all know what happened when the pandemic came around.
So, Michael, when you were CEO of the company, were you involved in any of the manufacturing, the design, or just sales of it?
No, we designed
you
them.
knew the tones you were looking for?
Yeah, we went over and spent I went over twice for a week and designed them. Once was with Jeff. And it's a weird thing to do because you get it the way, it's not how it's going to sound in 3 days. When you make the cymbal, they're still hot. They call it hot because the molecules, it's not hot to the touch. The molecules are still very active. And there's a lot of very complicated science to that. But we went over and designed them all. And that's when you really know, you better know what you're doing, because you're not saying, I'd like to hear it a little this. You're talking to a guy with a hammer in his hand and a guy with a lathe, and you're saying, we need to do this, and we're hammering it more here, less there, on the bell, not on the bell, underside, how are we lathing it, where's it getting thin? There's a lot to that you better know if you're talking to the guy who's got the hammer in his hand and you want him to recreate that. And what I couldn't believe is how consistent they were, because they're all handmade. I mean, they're casting these things and it's like pouring molten lava. That's a 12, that's a 20, you know, that's an 18.
How much do you know to pour? I mean, is there just enough molten metal in there? I mean, is there...
And that's a process too that's caustic. You know, the U.S., the more, like Brock took me on a tour once of the Remo factory. He was president of Remo. He's since retired. But it was a zero emission facility. Zero emissions. And Andy and those guys, I've not been to the Zildjian factory, but the Sabian I have many times. And all safety concerns are addressed. And that's one of the reasons they cost a little more to make in the U.S. or on the North American continent, because you have those things.
Now, the smiths that you were working with, as you're, you know, going after certain sounds and consulting with Jeff and so on, the guys that started Impression had previously been with Bosphorus, right? That was some key cymbal smiths and they're
just like the guys at Bosphorus had been with Istanbul.
Yeah.
And the guys at Istanbul had been with the K factory.
Yeah. And there's kind of a chart, and there'll be more of this in the cymbal book, but in the show program, the 2 pages, they're kind of an excerpt from the coming book. One is Zildjian name clarifications, because when you start looking into this, and there's a lot of good sources out. Pars Tuglaci is an Armenian historian that has written a really good book, and then there's John Cohen's Zildjian book, and Hugo Pinksterboer's The Cymbal book, and so on. But you're likely to see the same guy mentioned with like 7 different spellings. So the page on the Zildjian name clarifications kind of gives an example of that. It's one of the challenges of tracing the origins of some of these companies. But then on the page facing it is kind of rather than the father to son progression within the Zildjian family, it shows how the secrets of casting and manufacturing cymbals progressed largely from Mikhail Zildjian, and this is opposed to the Aram Zildjian, who came over to show Avidus and so on, and that'll be clarified in a little more detail in the book. But the guy that remained in Turkey, that is the father and grandfather of all the current Turkish cymbals, is Mikhail. And the chart kind of shows how his company ended up being the genesis of Bosphorus, Impression, yada, yada. There were always a couple of key cymbal smiths that decided to start off their own factory and so on.
This is great. I hadn't seen this before.
Um,
By the way, this you see ZIL with a C with a little funny thing under it. That's Zildjian. They would say Zildjian. That's how I would say that C. So there's a lot of different spellings.
Yeah. And things got really convoluted in that era. And I asked Robert once years ago why they weren't still making maybe a special series in Turkey, because it has the mystique and so on. And there was a lot of manufacturing in Canada and the U.S. And Bob looked at me and said, "Have you ever tried to do business with those guys?" I mean, and it was like the Wild West. He said, they're melting wire for copper and we're buying laboratory grade copper and so on. So a lot of moving parts in making a cymbal, as any of the guys downstairs, like Mr. Domini from Sao Paulo and so on, will tell you. But
let me throw in one little anecdote there.
Yeah.
Years ago, I saw the great Lenny DiMuzio, who was a staple at Zildjian for many years. And I was so frustrated. I said, "Lenny, Turkish cymbals, talk to me." And he said, "Michael, for 44 years, they used to come, they would import them to Zildjian for Fred Gretsch." I never quite understood that. But he said, "You never knew what you were going to get or what was going to be in the boxes when you opened them." It's a terrible Boston accent, but he had the same issue.
yeah,
It's very difficult.
yeah.
A lot of legions of people have been ripped off trying to get cymbals out of Istanbul. Be careful if you want to do that. Plus, you don't have any, just to point out the business side of things, if they don't have holdings in the U.S., you have no recourse at all with these people, period. Just remember that if you want to do that.
Yeah. And you can still get blanks. A lot of these cymbal smiths downstairs got started reworking cymbals. Somebody brought them a really heavy cymbal. They want a different sounding cymbal. These guys learned how to hammer and lathe, and that's a whole nother crucial step of the whole manufacturing process. But guys can buy blanks from Turkey, and there's various companies doing that. But you can also buy higher quality blanks from folks like Domini and from Sabian and so on, more laboratory grade. But like Mike says, not only do you not quite know on the Turkish blanks what you're getting, but there's also a time constraint. Cymbals are kind of like living things. The bronze alloy are elements that tend to start separating again. They age, they mature, and the cymbal smiths are experts at letting them rest. After they've been hammering and lathing and so on, they'll let them sit for a couple of days and come back and see what they've got, and they know where to hammer to change the tone, and it's a whole art form, and you can't let them sit too long. You take a blank to one of these guys and you say you got this Turkish blank 5 years ago, they're not going to want to talk to you because it's gotten brittle by then. There's an age thing.
So much changes. One time Kenny Washington sent it was a 22 A Zildjian, like 50 years old, with a big crack in it, and Jeff brought it over and we tried to reproduce it, and I mean, you're reproducing something that's 50 years old with a crack in it. And we got close. But you can't do that, really. You can get close, but you're not going to get it exact.
The manufacturing aspect, I don't know much about cymbals, but they got like, you're making it sound like it's a pretty archaic approach to making cymbals. But you'll talk to distributors here and they'll talk to you about weights and things like that. Were they able to still weigh the amount of metal, even though it was a very difficult process?
We used to put gram weights on the bottom of the cymbals.
Yeah.
Everyone had a gram weight. And I discontinued that because it got to be, all things equal, you can deduce certain things by the gram weights, but they're not all equal. So you can have two crash, whatever they are, 1,650 grams, and they're the same exact weight, but they have different properties to it. So the guys were like, we had a cymbal dealer, Cymbals Only, would order those. I want this one in this weight, this one in that weight, and this one in that weight. And then just, what you want, 1,800 grams? Okay, 1,800 grams, So, but it really, thin and thick is one thing, but the gram weight, a lot of people are doing that now. Take that with a grain of salt. I would like to address the secret formula stuff. Are we going to get to that?
Sure. Go ahead.
They talk about the formula. Years ago, I was asking Peter Erskine what he thought about that. And he said, way back, you had two synthesizer made brands. You had Moog and ARP, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were both using the same parts, but they sounded different because of the process. This one might go A to C to D, and that one A to B, you know, the way they were put together and soldered and used. So he thought it was about process. And that's what I've learned about the cymbal business. There isn't a secret formula. It's about the process. Do you use recycled copper? Is it bars? Is it little pellets? How are you heating them? How are you melting them? All these things. In fact, there's something that I had read about, and they had one at Sabian called a mass spectrometer. And you can aim it at a piece of metal, and it tells you what's in it to the trace elements. And I thought, you know, this makes a lot of sense, because we don't send guys up in space with some guy going, yeah, that's about right. You know? So you hope. So we did that. We took some cymbals from manufacturers, and we, you know, and it was what they 80-20. And there's always trace elements of stuff. You don't know what it is. They put catalyst things in there to burn those off. It's a little bit of tin, but the secret is not in the goo. Really, it's in the process of how it's done.
Yeah. Some of them, I understand, splash some water into the mold just before the bronze is poured in, whether it's salt water or fresh water. There used to be a thing about Zildjian having been located near the ocean because the salt air was
Is it
part
the
of
water in the
thing.
Bosphorus?
Yeah.
Are they using that water? It's a cold plunge is what it is. And it tempers the metal. When you first take it out of the oven and you roll it, it's like a black rock, and it's brittle. If you drop it, it breaks. And then they temper it, and at that point it becomes more malleable, and they can start working on it. Most of the brands now have videos that explain all that stuff. And I remember I was one of the first to go over there and videotape this, and they were like, not too anxious to share it. And other people were like, I wouldn't put that out because I wouldn't keep an animal in a shed like that. Andy used to call it the goat shed. So, but you got to remember, it's a different country, it's a different world, a different work ethic, different techniques. You can't just look at it like a Remo zero facility, zero emissions, everything clean as a whistle. That's not what it is.
Different sensibilities, even in ways. I've got time for an aside to illustrate that. This guy, I mentioned Pars Tuglaci. He's an Armenian academic author, written a lot of things. He's got this book called Turkish Bands, Past and Present. And there's a brief history of the Zildjian background in there. But held in very high esteem. And before one of my trips to Istanbul, he contacted me. It was just coincidence, the timing. He didn't know I was coming, but he contacted me and said that he had acquired one of the original Avidus Zildjian cymbals from centuries ago. And he would appreciate it if I would contact the Zildjian company on his behalf to see if maybe they would be interested in acquiring it for $5,000. And I contacted Craigie, or I tried to. I called her several times and didn't get a response. I sent her an email and didn't hear back from her. And but I went ahead and I set up the appointment to meet Dr. Tuglaci. And he showed up at my hotel at the appointed time, and he had this bundle. And the first thing he showed me was this assortment of clippings he had. He'd just returned from Portugal, where he'd given some addresses, and he was showing me some of the press clippings from it and so on. And I said, well, yeah, let's tell me about the cymbal. And he said, well, let's go up to your room. And I thought, well, it was a very small hotel and a very small reception room. I didn't quite understand why he wanted to go up to my room, but we go up to my room and he unwraps it. And it's like a band cymbal, an A Zildjian from like the 50s. And I thought, what in the world is going on? And he didn't speak real good English, but I said, this is from like the 1950s. And he's 1915. And he's trying to split the difference and make it, but it had, an ink stamp with English letters on it and so on. So, and it was obviously way off. And then I started to kind of panic because I've seen Midnight Express, and I thought, all this guy
I saw
has
that
to
prison,
do,
by the way. I know where that is.
all this guy has to do is drop a big piece of hash on the floor and call his friends, and I'm out of here. But I said, I'll take pictures. I took pictures. I'll talk to Zildjian. Thank you very much, and I'll let you know what they have to say. When I got back and talked to Craigie, the reason she hadn't been getting back to me is she was already pursuing litigation. She had heard a similar story, and I don't know if it was Dr. Tuglati or if it was someone else, but Zildjian had already been approached about an ancient cymbal for $5,000, and they bought it. They paid for it, and they were in litigation trying to get their money back or a cymbal or something. So the next morning, I was scheduled to go to Bosphorus, the sales offices. And I got up there and I was telling the guys about what had happened because I was shell shocked, and they weren't surprised at all. They just, yeah, what's the point of your story? And I said, but isn't that shocking to you? And they said, no, you have to understand. Americans come over here with money falling out of their pockets, and it's like picking up apples off the ground. I'm thinking, oh, okay.
There is a different aesthetic there. There is an unsavory element to the Turkish cymbal industry, very unsavory, that I can say without offending anybody. I'm not mentioning a specific company. I would like to mention one person who doesn't fit that mold, and it's Arman Tomarczuk. I hope I don't say his name wrong. He was Agop's son, and he's the head of Agop Cymbals, Istanbul Agop, British educated gentleman. And I can only say good things about him. Other than that, just be careful. I'm being very cautious with my wording.
Any questions or rabbit holes we can go down? Go ahead. Yeah.
Didn't want to embarrass my daughter here because she was going to ask a question. But okay, so I just want to know a little bit more about that industry and the connection between Turkish cymbals. Because, for example, I don't know, probably 10 at least years ago, I was at PASIC, and Supernatural Cymbals was there. I don't know if you.
I knew that guy. Yeah.
And it had a big booth, and I picked out the set. I thought they sounded great. And it was, I don't know if they were doing it in Turkey, or if they had a guy that moved to like Miami to say it, and he was hammering on. I can't remember.
Willie Salas.
Oh, okay. And then like in 2 years, they were done.
Right.
I still have the cymbals, and they're great. But there's all these other ones that it seems like is Turkey set up sort of like China, where you've got a factory that's, if you want to make something, this factory can make X, Y, Z, right? And then
What's your first name?
Chris.
If you want Chris cymbals, there's a bunch of people you can go to over there, and they'll make Chris cymbals for you. But if I want Michael cymbals, they'll make the same thing for me. And if he wants Adam cymbals, they'll make Adam cymbals for him. And you send them money, they send you cymbals, and hopefully you get them. And one of the concerns we had was that, how about the cymbal Jeff Hamilton designed or Stanton Moore designed? Or, I mean, they just put a different name on it, call it something else. Anybody can, I'm not accusing our guys of doing that. I'm just saying that you can't trademark, patent that stuff. You know, well, we had a little wider lathing. Or this one's not hammered on the underside of the bell, or whatever. So somebody told me there was a factory there that had 3 doors with 3 names on them. 3 brand names.
Tough beer on the Simpsons.
It's just as a process of branding. You know, I know there's a lot of young cymbalsmiths out there. I think that's great. I don't know what their expectations are, but if you're going against the big boys, you're going to have to sell, you know, you're in 30, 40 countries. You're selling tens of thousands of cymbals. If you're one guy, it could be make some great products. You have a kitchen table business, basically. You're buying the blanks and you're creating cymbals that you can create. But, you know, I've asked some of the guys here, how many are you making? So, well, you know, maybe 10 a month. It's just like the snare drum stuff, right? There's a million drum companies out there. They're all probably great cats and great drums. But to get into dealers and be part of several countries and have a brand, that's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah.
And what can I keep going?
Yeah.
When I was, 2004 is when I bought into the whole cymbal game. And it was all done by dealers. The iPhone hadn't been invented yet. YouTube was out in 2007, I think, and then it didn't catch on until maybe 2010 or later. This was prior to all that. But the internet was starting to take off. Well, dealer agreements prohibited them. If you had a dealer agreement for XYZ, whatever, you had a district you could sell in. And that was that, like a Harley dealer or something, right? You can't just open one on every street corner. It's not like Coca-Cola. It could be in every street corner. So that's protected. And it was being broken down by the internet. We all know where it's gone. And I was told, Michael, you have an illegitimate business because you sell to dealers who sell online. It's like, well, the day's coming when they're all going to sell online. But I'd say the NAMM report says 5% of people this year are willing to buy musical instruments online. And I would say, do you think that number is going to be bigger or smaller next year? Well, we all know where it's gone, but you couldn't make friends by convincing a dealer he was wrong. So we just kept that model going because nobody, Brock again told me, Michael, this is what Remo talks about it all the time. It's a question of who puts their leg in the water first and how much foot do they bring back? Because if you got 400 dealers around the world, around the country, that's your network. Now, the dealers can't take all the, how many, you got 150 drum companies out there. You have your mom and pop drum shop. You might have one or two dealers, one or two brands you can service. Same thing with cymbals, same thing with everything else. So these companies are offering their products online. Well, that's where it's all going. That's why, Sam Ash just closed, right? Or retail anyway.
Yeah, right.
Retail. So what happened then was there was a guy named Tony Costello who had cymbals only. And he decided, hey, I can sell high-end cymbals with sound files. That's the ultimate arbiter of what it sounds like, right? Because everybody, if you want a special ride cymbal that's got all that nuance in it, you're not going to buy it without hearing it. So he said, well, they can hear it. I'll put sound files up on every cymbal. And he had hundreds of them. Well, the only people who would do business with him when he started was us at Bosphorus and a goat. Everybody else said, nope, we can't sell to you. You sell online. And he was our biggest dealer by far. And then one day I was at Jim Pettit's in Memphis, great dealer, great guy. And I said, man, you've been a great dealer, but there's a company that's selling more cymbals of ours in a week than you can in a couple of months because he uses the sound files. Well, the light bulb went off in Jim's head. The next time I saw him, he said, let me show you my cymbal. And we went to a place at a Starbucks or something we get bandwidth at NAMM, and he's got mycymbal.com where he elevated it to video. So now, and I used to go bring 50 cymbals to him and do videos every day to get them all done. Not that it was about me playing, it was just demonstrating a cymbal. So I tried to get masterful at that. You want to hear the bell, the bow, the edge. And he's probably the biggest cymbal dealer in the world. And that's why. First of all, if he's with a company, he's got everything. I said, what do you want to stock? Yeah, I want to stock everything you have. And if he's not with a company, then, he's going to service the ones he does. But nowadays, that's becoming de rigueur, right? Everybody is putting sound files, video files up. We all have it on our phones. We could put the high-def headphones in and hear it and see it. And there's liberal return policies and all that. So that all changed dramatically. And I was in the middle of that, trying to negotiate that, angering a lot of dealers. And it got to the point where we couldn't add dealers faster than they were going out of business. So like I said, it's been 10 years now since I've been involved, but it's a whole different ballgame now. And what it's done is allowed for a lot of boutique companies to come up. We used to go to the NAMM show, and every year there'd be 5 more cymbal companies. Guys would say, this is your fault to me. But that's how it went. That's where it's going. We all know that, right?
I gotta just throw this out there, but what's the markup on cymbals? I know there's a lot involved with.
There's several ways you can look at structuring your pricing is the thing most CEOs are at least comfortable with. You can say, well, it's going to cost X amount, and we're going to sell it to the dealers at X amount, and we're going to buy it for this amount, and we're going to make the same amount on each cymbal. It generally doesn't play out that way. So the guys in Turkey would charge us. We did a series with Ralph Peterson, the Oracles. And when I moved to Crescent, I said, Ralph, I'd love to continue doing them, but I can't make a dime on them. You had to make them twice, basically. They were wonderful cymbals, but you had to bake them twice, cook them twice, and it was a fortune. So they're going to charge you for the cymbals based on how much work is involved in that cymbal. They used to call them Turks, meant they weren't lathed.
Yeah.
Well, that was a lot easier to make. So they were less money than something that was very thin. You might break more of them when you're making them. They make them cheaper than they do here because of a lot of reasons. Union labor maybe, or at least American labor standards, environmental concerns, health and safety. But they don't have to ship them from China or Istanbul. So none of them are making a lot of money if you want to go that way.
Yeah, that's what I would contribute to that also. I mean, the formula that pops into my mind when you ask that is I had music stores for years, and the formula that I always went with on used cymbals was I felt if somebody walked in with the cymbal and said, "Here, I want to sell this," and I've had it for 3 years and it looks okay, it's not cracked or anything, and I'd say, well, it retails for X. I can sell it for half of that. I can buy it for half of that. So if somebody's got $1,000 cymbal, retail $1,000 in the catalog, I figure I can sell it for $500 if it's in playable condition. I can pay $250 for it. But back to that retail. As a cymbal dealer, I could generally buy it at 50%. I could buy a new one for 50%, so I could buy a used one at 25% of retail.
They're cheaper now. When I was doing it, they had, let's say you set list price is $100. Okay, so we keep even numbers. MAP they instituted, meaning minimum advertised pricing, which is what the industry went to try to compete with the big box stores, would be 40 off, let's say. Dealers hated that because you're setting the price they could sell it at. So if it's $100, the street price is $60, the dealer would look to buy it for less than $40.
Which is hard. You have to be a big dealer to do that. And Zildjian and all the other companies have kind of shifted their distribution policies, and at one point they'll cut off all the direct dealers and only go through certain distributors and so on. But as a music store owner, in a small town, in a relatively small store, generally I could get new cymbals at 50% off. If I was new to Sabian and I bought in and I got the 36 minimum order, then I might get an extra 20%. So you can pretty much project what their cost is, because they've obviously got manufacturing and liability and a whole raft of overhead that the Turkish don't have. But the Turkish have to ship it over. So it's pretty hard to answer the question.
The importer pays it. The general thing was, if you do gross profit margin, if you know all that jive, they try to make about 40% gross profit margin, the dealers do. And the bigger players were getting it like at 38%, but they're buying larger numbers. And, then you have clinic. The other thing, let's talk about the size of the industry. The cymbal industry is a tiny industry. We think of these companies, remember the network, the movie Network? Why us? Well, because you're on TV. Everybody thinks these things are big because you see them on movies and television and all. A good grocery store, whatever you have, a Kroger or whatever, can do $1 million in a week. That's more than any cymbal company I know of. And that's one store. So they're very small. Even the big guys are very small. You're talking 30, 40, 50 million at most. Most of the guys, when you see all these independent companies, they're making a few $100,000. There's not a lot of profit in it for anybody. So it has to be a labor of love.
It seems like it, because you figure it's copper and tin. They probably got maybe $8 in materials,
right.
But boy, when you get into the manufacturing, the casting, the lathing,
if you think that's cheap, try it yourself. Try to set up casting in the U.S. and see what that costs you. And it's not an easy thing. And then the cost of marketing is outrageous. If you wanted to open a coin-operated laundry or a machine-operated car wash, How do you market? You put an ad in a church bulletin or something, right? This is like, there used to be magazine ads are like $3,000-$4,000 a page, or maybe 5 magazines, and they came out every month, you know. And then the trade shows, you could spend $30,000-$40,000 going to NAMM, and the artist endorsements. Don't get artists involved if you can't afford to service them. They love your stuff and you love them, but they're playing them. They need support too. Every now and then you get a call. Hey, I'm doing a video shoot in New York tomorrow, and I need a set of blanks. Blanks are 2 cymbals glued together so that you can hit them. They don't make much noise because they're using pre-record. So now you're gluing 2 sets of cymbals. The guy may have 8 cymbals, 16 cymbals, and you're overnighting them to New York, and you're never going to see them again. I asked one great artist if he wanted to come on board. He said, well, so-and-so sending me on a clinic tour of Southeast Asia. Can you do that? I said, man, I can't send you on a clinic tour of South Georgia. Sorry, but no. So you have to take all that with a grain of salt. The marketing expenses are enormous. If you want to do that. And I see a lot of these guys out here might be better situated than I was because they don't have to do all that. They're going to make what they make. It's a labor of love. They don't have to cast them. They get what they do. They sell. They have their thing. God bless them. But they're not trying to do that. And I don't know how all that's changed because there is no print media anymore.
Yeah.
So it's all online, and that's a whole different game.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like I don't know anybody at Zildjian anymore, or at Zabian, except a couple of people. And yeah, the whole industry has changed so much.
So much.
Not just with COVID, but with the online marketing and so on. And they're different companies than they used to be. Now, it wasn't just the loss of Robert and Armand. It was the whole industry.
You know Phil Hood, right? He was co-founder of Drum Magazine. He told me he went to NAMM a few years ago. He didn't know anybody.
Yeah.
But that's normal. You know, that's the business cycle. To me, if you have a business that doesn't make money and it's not successful, you should go out of business. That's the business cycle, right? If you're doing well, you continue and you grow. And that's part of the game. Any other questions? We have some, yeah.
I'm curious about the relationships between the Turkish companies out there. Like, you take a media and Pergamon, is it like Coke and Pepsi, or they're rivals, or are they working together?
It's a very closed-mouth inner game there. A lot of the people who work at the cymbal companies are family. They're people they've known all their lives. They have secrets. A lot of secrets about hand hammering. A lot of secrets like hand hammering. Okay, there, I just hand hammered that table. See what I mean? Is it hand hammered completely? Are they shaping it with machines? How much machinery are they using? Are there secret rooms in the back that you won't know about? Yes, there are. Are there processes that you'll never know about? Yes, there are. Can you visit them 10 times and never see that? Yes. So it's a whole big secret thing, and they don't share it very well, and there's a lot of animosity in those companies, not a lot of sharing.
Yeah, when you lose a key employee that's got, you know, such skill and key insider information, I would point at the diagram and at a good illustration of, to answer your question, is at the bottom of the page where Ibrahim Duril, Murat Duril, and Mustafa Duril. Now, they all traveled together with another cousin to Istanbul. They're from Samsun. They went to Istanbul, and they worked with Mehmet and Ega. And eventually the three of them moved back to Samsun, and they kind of worked together for a while. They did a series for, oh gosh, who was it?
Meinl, right?
They worked for Meinl, and there was another series they worked with the company on. But then the three of them have since started their 3 separate Duril companies. And they have pretty different philosophies about sharing their knowledge. The Mustafa Duril kind of took Francisco Domini under his wing and has the philosophy that, this needs to be passed on and communicated and shared and so on. And Francesco kind of has that attitude. People, a number of the independent cymbal smiths have been down to Sao Paulo and worked with, Francisco, who learned in Turkey from Mustafa. But the other branches of the Drill family are not quite on that same wavelength. And I don't know as they even communicate, but there are some hard feelings there. And I'm sure there's a lot of hard feelings all the way across that family tree.
Robert and Armand Zildjian.
Well, yeah, there you go.
There was a bad one there, man. And, this is full history of this. I'm telling you, it's an unsavory industry when you get over there and really look at it.
Yeah, when Sabian and Zildjian split, when Zildjian split, and it didn't become Sabian for a little while, but Robert Zildjian was not able to use the Zildjian name, and his family was not able. And it really pissed off Billy. You'd see him at a trade show, and he'd have the name crossed off because it just as a poke back, because he was not able to use in his business practice the name of Zildjian.
Got a bug in your head.
Because of the agreement.
Right. Yeah, Andy
into.
Zildjian, by the way, is the president of Sabian. It's the Zildjian family that is both of them. I wouldn't look for them to reunite anytime soon, but...
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing I read, I don't want to, the quote...
Really? Well, I mean, I know they're not as big as Zildjian, but a lot of artists and their cymbals do something. So he did have... He paid attention. He did his homework. He built it.
Robert?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they argued about handmade versus... and the factory in Meductic was their hunting facility.
Zilko.
And they had Zilko for a while, too. That's right. It's crazy. One thing, and they actually had this on the website at Bosphorus a while. Years ago, if you had what we would call an at-risk young man, and you say, well, they should maybe join the military, so make a man out of them, right? The courts would have them do summertime manual labor under intense conditions to try to toughen them up and give them responsibility. And a lot of those kids were assigned to cymbal companies.
Really?
They mention, I don't have it. There's some mention, it's kind of in code now, where the guys at Bosphorus were both assigned, they're all assigned to such and such. And that's what they meant. They're not telling you that, but none of this is to disparage anybody's products. If you hit it and you like it and it hits you, it makes you move, that's the cymbal for you. And I don't care if it's a trash can,
Yeah, and that's going to change too. The story that always comes to my mind is I was working with Maury LaShawn, who ran Frank's Drum Shop for years, and I went to Florida to sit with him and record his life story and then transcribe it, and it became Frank's For the Memories, the story of Frank's Drum Shop. Well, along the way, he was telling me a story about a cymbal that turned on the lights for him. He heard it at Frank's Drum Shop before he owned Frank's Drum Shop. Frank Gall owned it. Maury was in there flipping through cymbals, and he found a cymbal that just, that's the way he worded it, turn on the lights. That it talked to him. He knew he had to have that cymbal. And he put it at the back of the pile, and Frank saw what he was doing and asked him, and he said, that's going to be my cymbal, but I can't get it today. Frank insisted that he take it and pay him on time and so on. So at the end of this long story, Maury says, I still have that cymbal. It's in the garage. Would you like to hear it? And I'm thinking, it's a holy grail. Of course I want to hear it. I'm going to hear a cymbal. And he dug it out, and he tapped it and looked at me, and I'm thinking,
You didn't dig it.
it's not for me. I can't, I wouldn't give you $10 for it. It's not something I could use, but everybody's different.
They used to say at Sabian, every cymbal has a home, just not here.
Every painter is different.
I used to tell people, if you had the Tony Williams K Holy Grail from Nefertiti, you might play it and say, that's nice, but I'm really looking for something like the Tony Williams K on Nefertiti. You wouldn't know it if you heard it necessarily. Because and there's recordings of Tony playing like Paiste and sonic opposites, and he sounds like Tony. So as much as I'm in the gear game,
How about environment? When you
it's
hear a
it's
cymbal
it's not the painter.
in
Never mind.
at a trade show or downstairs, how can you convert it to how it's going to speak to you in a smaller room, in a quiet room?
Well, I can because I heard thousands of them. You know what I mean? Yeah, my son's a guitar player. He was getting good at it too. Artists would call and we knew what he wanted. Kevin, just see what you find. And I would always do the final check. But it's like if you lined up 30 bass players, right? And you heard each one of them's going to appeal to you. Oh, wow. Same thing with drummers, right? Drummers are very good at sharing. How many are pros drummers out here? A lot of them, right? A lot of guys, professional musicians. So you know that a leader, you might have 10 guys that are your peers, wherever you live, and the leader's going to like one better than the other. And that's okay. That's good. We don't all play the same. So when you hear enough cymbals, you know, it's the same thing with snare. Can you really tell if you hear a snare drum? Is that cherry? Is it walnut? Is it got poplar in it? What are the plies made out of? What kind of bearing edges on that thing anyway? Well, on and on and on. We know when we're playing it. I like when you see guitar players, they're playing and they just turn a little dial here, and we don't hear it, but they do. You just want to express your soul the best way you can. Now, there's some train of thought that those are your cymbals, that's how you sound. Or, hey man, we'll get this right if it takes every penny you've got. I got 50 cymbals, baby. We'll be here all day. Now, to me, if you're an Adam Nussbaum, Adam's got his sound, and they call Adam to be Adam. But maybe not if you're the session cat that's called in to do the next Miley Cyrus album, and that's what they want. Just like the hip-hop guys, when they show up, the producer has the snare drum and the bass drum sounds. That's all triggered. I don't care what kind of drum you use. It ain't your sound. So all of those things. Danny Gottlieb, as much as he was known for his cymbal sound with Pat Metheny, and a wonderful player, wonderful cymbal sound, he does the Lieutenant Dan band now, and they travel and he just plays backline. So it really doesn't matter. It's fine for that. He's probably right. So, whatever you hear and whatever you feel. And usually you'll get tired of that and want something different after a while. Adam, what you got?
No, I mean, this is fascinating to get this information. Over time, I've realized it's, at the end of the day, it's the painter, not the brush, and you can have one cymbal up here and we'd all play it and we'd all sound different. Yeah. Because everybody has a different touch. And for me, I found that, when I get a cymbal, it may sound good, by itself, but the litmus test is really how does it sound within a context? My whole life has been playing music with others. I just don't sit and play drums by myself. Very few people want to hear that. So my whole thing has been trying to work with others and what's the appropriate tool for the situation. And then we have to adapt because every room you play in is going to be different. What works playing in one venue will be different in another. And the first thing I do when I go into a room where I've never played is I usually just clap my hands together, try to get a flavor of what the sonics are of the environment. And, we have to adapt to the situation. You can't change the room. And
But do you adapt by the way you play it, or you bring in different gear?
I
Play it.
the way I'm playing it,
Right.
it takes a long time to figure out how to play a piece of metal.
Mm-hmm.
It's an instrument.
Mhm.
You don't want to hit it. You got to learn how to play it.
Beautiful.
So I've been doing it a long time. I'm starting to get it together.
Every now and then I have delusions of adequacy. That's how I look at it.
That's a good segue because we'll be turning it over to Adam shortly. We should probably wrap up. Any last minute questions?
I would like to add one other thing.
Hour.
I would like to add one other thing. If you go into business selling whatever, you say, well, there's a market for this. I need to make a product that suits that at the price point. We didn't do any of that. Cymbal companies we found answering to market forces, had gotten away from the kind of cymbals we liked. Thin, responsive cymbals because they don't really necessarily hold up against a Marshall stack in an outdoor shed. So the cymbal companies had all gotten thicker, for music was getting louder and bigger, and the market went that way, as they should. But when we came around, there was timing involved, this was the early 2000s, where people were starting to say, yeah, those are great, but how about the old ones you can bend in your hand that are expressive, that you can hit with a thumb, that you can just pull it out of, and it gets big and it gets small. So we had that sound palette in mind, and that's all we did. That's kind of the opposite way you would recommend going about a business. And it happened at the time when there was a need for that in the marketplace. But we didn't know enough to know that. You know, we didn't do market studies, and we just made the cymbals the way we thought they should sound in our little enclaves.
Which is what the guys downstairs are kind of doing now, yeah.
That's why you got to hand it to them.
Yeah.
They don't care what the market says. They're building drums they love. They're building cymbals they love. And that will drive them. Ultimately, it's the people who decide what the market is. Remember a few years ago, you have a cap on, they were torn in the front. Sorry. That was a big thing. The kids were tearing up the front of the hats. Well, you bought them that way pretty soon, right?
Or the jeans with all
Jeans with holes in them. Whatever it is, the market decides what people are going to offer. Because even if we had decided, well, hell with the market, this is what we want, if nobody would have bought them, would have been belly up.
I went and saw Clank with Calvin Rogers, big gospel drummer. And so he just come out, Sabian had just shipped them some big sloppy, you could take those cymbals and almost bend them. They were, I mean, was that just a concept? Because I don't see anybody playing them. I mean,
artists get stuff that nobody else has because they're working with artists and they're always looking for new product. New products drive every industry. So you can never say, well, here's it, we got it. You know, there's always the new and improved model or something different. Or I asked Craigie once when I was interviewing him, I said, your family's making cymbals for hundreds of years. So I imagine you have to have like one foot in the past and one in the present. Thank you. Knowing that they had just come up with a cymbal series that was in honor of her father and some other newfangled thing that was a different palette. And yeah, that's what they were trying to do.
they were just huge. They started like 22 inch and went up to like 26. They were just
Hard to travel with those things.
Yeah, and I don't think they caught on because I've never ever seen anybody.
Well, they're expensive as hell. Used to be when you went on a Stan Kenton band, you played Stan cymbals, and it was a 26-inch ride. That's Cosmo over there. We love Cosmo.
Well, thanks so much, Michael. We
Thank
all
you, Rob.
learned a lot.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, everyone. It's been my honor to be here. Here all week, try the veal. No. I'm hanging around tomorrow, too. If anybody wants to talk shop with me, I'm more than happy
And
to.
Adam will be up at 3 o'clock.
Adam's up at 3. You don't want to miss that. Thank you, everyone.